Subscribe to Storylab. Now let's begin this one. Marshal Hoffman's hands were steady as he stripped down his rifle in the makeshift barracks, the Afghan dust still clinging to his gear despite 3 showers. 6 months into this deployment, and the routine had become second nature. Wake patrol, fight, sleep, repeat. The private military contractor work paid well, better than his army days, and he needed every dollar for the custody battle waiting back home in Nevada. His phone buzzed. Donna Goodwin, his neighbor. Strange, she never called while he was overseas. The video loaded slowly over the spotty connection. Marshall's jaw clenched as the footage played. His 8-year-old son Marcus being dragged by his dark hair across the driveway. The boy's small hands clawing at the concrete. His mouth open in a scream Marshall couldn't hear through the silent video. A man in jeans and a police tactical vest. Royal Trujillo, his ex-wife's new husband, yanked the child into the house like he was hauling a sack of garbage. The text beneath made Marshall's blood run cold. I called 911 3 times. They won't come. He's a cop. I recorded what I could. I'm sorry. Marshall replayed the video. Marcus's face was twisted in terror. There. A dark bruise on his left cheek, partially hidden by his hair. His son's Superman t-shirt was torn at the collar. The boy's legs kicked desperately as Trujillo dragged him up the porch steps. The phone was already at Marshall's ear before he'd decided to move. Blake Howard. The voice was gravelly, tired. It's Hoffman. I need help. Blake Howard had been Marshall's sergeant during his final tour in the 75th Ranger Regiment. They'd pulled each other out of more shitstorms than either cared to remember. After Marshall left the Army for contracting work, Blake stayed in, eventually moving to a training position at Fort Liberty. Talk to me. The weariness vanished from Blake's voice. Marshall sent the video, heard the silence as Blake watched it. Then, Jesus Christ. Donna says 911 won't respond. The guy's a cop in Henderson PD. My lawyer's been telling me Stacy's new husband is a stabilizing influence for the custody hearing. Marshall's voice was flat, controlled. I need to get home. 12-hour flight minimum from Kabul. Probably 14 with connections. A pause. Or I can have a recon team at your house in 8 minutes. I've got 3 Rangers finishing a training rotation at Nellis Air Force Base. Good men. They'll secure your son. Marshall closed his eyes. Thought of Marcus's face. The bruise. The terror. Make the call. Done. Give me your ex's address. Marshall rattled it off. The house he'd paid the down payment on before Stacy decided she wanted something different and filed for divorce 18 months ago. Before she started dating Royal Trujillo, a 12-year veteran of Henderson PD with a spotless record and friends in every corner of Nevada law enforcement. Marshall. Blake's voice carried a warning. These boys go in, it's going to make waves. Trujillo's got a badge. This gets messy fast. My son's being dragged by his hair on concrete. I don't care about waves. Roger that. I'll call you back in 10. The line went dead. Marshall stood in the barracks, surrounded by sleeping contractors and the smell of gun oil and sweat. His hands weren't shaking. His breathing was steady. This was the part of himself that had made him a good ranger. The ability to compartmentalize, to turn emotion into mission planning. He opened his laptop and started searching. Royal Trujillo's social media was locked down, but his Henderson PD profile photo showed a man in his late 30s, square-jawed, with the kind of smile that probably charmed juries and civilians alike. Commendations for bravery. Community outreach awards. A photograph of him at a youth football game, coaching. The image of a model officer. Marshall dug deeper. Found a local news article from 3 years ago. Officer Trujillo and his partner responding to a domestic disturbance that turned into a shootout. The partner took a bullet. Trujillo returned fire, killing the suspect. The department cleared him immediately. A hero's story. But Marshall knew how to read between lines. He found the incident report buried in public records. The suspect was unarmed when the coroner examined him. The gun found at the scene had no fingerprints. The investigation had been cursory at best, closed within 48 hours. The partner who'd been shot retired on disability 6 months later and moved out of state. His phone rang. Blake. Teams rolling. Sergeant Clinton Delgado's in command. Former 2nd Battalion. Solid as they come. He's got two specialists with him. They're 4 minutes out. What's the play? Delgado's going to knock. If Trujillo answers, they'll identify themselves as military personnel conducting a welfare check on a minor child of an active contractor. If he refuses access, they'll call Henderson PD and request immediate backup for a suspected child endangerment situation. Creates a paper trail, gets other cops on scene. Harder for Trujillo to control the narrative with witnesses. And if it goes sideways, these boys know how to handle themselves. But Marshall, you need to get stateside. Now, whatever Delgado does tonight, it's just a stopgap. Trujillo's going to lawyer up, and you need to be there to take custody. I'll be on the first flight out. One more thing. Blake's voice dropped. I pulled Trujillo's jacket through some channels. Got a buddy in Vegas Metro. There's rumors, nothing official, but word is Trujillo's got a temper. 2 excessive force complaints filed and buried. One of the complainants moved to California a month after filing. The other one withdrew their statement. He's dirty. Yeah, and he's connected. Henderson PD's union rep is his brother-in-law. The deputy chief goes to his church. You're going up against the blue wall. Marshall looked at the video again. Marcus's face, the bruise, the terror. Then I'll go through it. He hung up and started packing. His team leader walked into the barracks, took one look at Marshall's face, and simply asked, "Family emergency?" "My son. Go. I'll clear it with the company." Marshall was throwing his gear into a duffel when his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "Mr. Hoffman? This is Sergeant Clinton Delgado. I'm at your ex-wife's residence. Your son is safe." The relief hit like a physical blow. Marshall sat down hard on his bunk. "Is he hurt?" "He's got some bruising. Looks like he's been grabbed roughly. Fingerprint marks on his upper arms, a bruise on his face. Nothing requiring immediate medical attention. But I've called Henderson PD to request both a supervisor and child protective services. Your ex-wife is uncooperative. She's demanding we leave. Trujillo is currently in the garage. He's armed and refusing to come out. Where's Marcus?" "With me. He's scared but responsive. Keeps asking for you." "Sir, I need to advise you. Trujillo called his union rep before I could secure his weapon. This is about to become a jurisdictional situation. I'm military, he's civilian law enforcement, and technically I have no authority here. If Henderson PD sides with him, tell Marcus I'm coming home. Tell him to be brave for one more day. Can you stay until CPS arrives?" "I'll stay as long as I can, but..." Voices erupted in the background. Delgado's voice turned sharp. "Sir, I need to go. Multiple units just arrived. I'll keep your son safe." The line cut. Marshall finished packing in 90 seconds. His mind was already working through the problem like a tactical operation. Objective, protect Marcus. Obstacles, Royal Trujillo, the Henderson PD, a family court system that favored mothers, and his ex-wife who'd chosen to ignore, or worse, enable, the abuse. He thought about Blake's words. The blue wall. Trujillo's connections. The buried complaints. The suspicious shooting. This wasn't just about a custody battle anymore. This was about a corrupt cop who thought his badge made him untouchable. Marshall had spent 12 years learning how to neutralize threats in hostile territory. Royal Trujillo had just made himself the mission. The flight to Dubai left in 2 hours. From there, another connection to Los Angeles, then Vegas. 26 hours minimum. 26 hours to plan. 26 hours for Royal Trujillo to use every resource at his disposal to spin the narrative, to paint Marshall as an absent father overreacting to normal discipline, to make Marcus's terror and bruises disappear into paperwork and excuses. But Marshall had resources too. He had Blake Howard. He had Sergeant Delgado and his team. He had his own training, his own network of soldiers and contractors who understood that sometimes the rules had to bend to protect the innocent. And now he had video evidence, a witness in Donna Goodwin, and a certain knowledge that Royal Trujillo was exactly the kind of predator he'd spent his career hunting. Marshall walked out of the barracks into the Afghan night. The stars were brilliant overhead, the same stars that would be setting over Nevada in a few hours. He thought of Marcus, 8 years old and terrified, probably lying awake in that house wondering when his father would come. Soon, Marshall whispered, "I'm coming home, buddy. And when I get there, this ends." He didn't know yet how it would end. But Royal Trujillo had made a critical mistake. The same mistake Marshall had seen warlords and insurgents make over and over. He'd gotten comfortable, confident, convinced that his power and position made him invulnerable. Marshall would teach him otherwise. The Dubai airport was a blur of white corridors and duty-free shops. Marshall sat in the departure lounge, phone pressed to his ear as Blake updated him. 12 hours since Delgado's team had arrived at the house. 12 hours of hell. CPS showed up, took statements from everyone. Marcus told them about previous incidents, Trujillo grabbing him, pushing him, calling him names. Your ex-wife denied all of it, said Marcus was lying for attention. The CPS workers seemed skeptical of her. But here's the problem. Trujillo's lieutenant showed up and vouched for him. Said he's been a model officer for 12 years, volunteers with kids, no history of complaints. You told me there were complaints. Buried. Off the record. The union made them disappear. Officially, Trujillo's jacket is clean. Marshall gripped the phone. What about the video? Dona gave it to CPS and Henderson PD. Trujillo's claiming he was removing Marcus from a dangerous situation. Says the boy ran into the street and he had to grab him quickly to prevent him from getting hit by a car. Stacy backed up his story. That's bullshit. The video shows Marcus on the driveway. Yeah, and the street's visible in the background. No cars. But without audio, without Marcus running toward the street in frame, it's Trujillo's word. And he's a cop. CPS is calling it concerning but not conclusive of abuse. Marshall wanted to put his fist through something. So Marcus goes back to them. CPS placed him with Stacy under the condition that Trujillo move out temporarily pending investigation. But Marshall, he's not going to move out. No. And even if he does officially, he'll be back the second CPS closes the case. These investigations take weeks, and unless Marcus has injuries requiring hospitalization, they're not going to remove him from his mother's custody. Especially since you're overseas and Stacy's arguing you're an unstable presence who abandoned the family for contractor work. The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Marshall stood, slinging his bag over his shoulder. I'm getting on the plane to LAX. 12 hours. What can we do in 12 hours? I'm already working it. I've got a friend at JAG looking into legal options. And Marshall, there's something else. I did more digging on Trujillo. Found out he's been running a side business out of his garage. Security consulting for some sketchy clients. Nothing illegal on paper, but the kind of people who need private security advice from a cop usually aren't upstanding citizens. You think he's dirty beyond just being a bad cop? I think he's arrogant enough to believe he's untouchable. Men like that get sloppy. They leave trails. We just need to find them. Marshall boarded the flight, his mind churning. Royal Trujillo was protected by his badge, by his connections, by the institutional machinery that closed ranks around dirty cops. But protection could become a prison if you knew how to seal the doors from the outside. The plane took off into the darkness. Somewhere ahead, across oceans and continents, his son was probably lying in bed, wondering why his father hadn't come yet, why the soldiers had left, why everything still felt wrong. Marshall closed his eyes and began planning. Not the hot-blooded revenge of a desperate father, but the cold, methodical strategy of a soldier who'd spent years learning how to dismantle insurgent networks. Find weak points. Apply pressure. Watch the structure collapse. Royal Trujillo didn't know it yet, but he'd just become the target of someone who'd made a career out of hunting people who thought themselves untouchable. The flight attendant offered drinks. Marshall declined. He needed to stay sharp, needed to think, because when he landed in Las Vegas, the real operation would begin. And this time, there would be no burial of complaints, no closed investigations, no blue wall thick enough to protect a man who'd put his hands on Marcus. This time, Royal Trujillo would learn what it meant to face someone who played by a different set of rules. The Las Vegas sun was a hammer against Marshall's skull as he walked out of McCarran International Airport. 26 hours of travel, 3 hours of broken sleep, and a rage that had settled into cold, clear focus. His phone showed 17 missed calls, 4 from Stacy, 3 from a number he didn't recognize, 10 for Blake. He called Blake first. "Where are you?" Blake's voice was tight. "Just landed." "What happened?" "CPS close a case." They're calling it a heated disciplinary moment that doesn't rise to the level of abuse. Trujillo's back in the house. "Marshall, they're saying if you make trouble, they'll use it against you in the custody hearing." Stacy's lawyer is already drafting a motion to restrict your visitation, claiming you incited a military intervention that traumatized Marcus. Marshall stood in the pickup zone, watching cars stream past. "They're using my attempt to protect my son as evidence I'm unstable." "Yeah, and there's more. That unknown number that called you? That's Sterling Blanchard, Trujillo's attorney. He's threatening to file harassment charges against you, Delgado, and me for conspiring to intimidate a law enforcement officer. It's all posturing, but he's trying to put you on defense before you even land." "When's the custody hearing?" 2 weeks. Judge Caroline Fields. She's got a reputation for being tough, but fair. But Marshall, Stacy's going to paint you as an absent father who chose money over his son. And with Trujillo being a respected cop, they're going to argue Marcus is better off with them. Marshall's grip on the phone tightened. "Is there any legal way to get Marcus out of that house before the hearing?" "Not without evidence of imminent danger. The video isn't enough. CPS cleared them. And if you try to take Marcus without a court order, I'm the one who gets arrested." "Got it." Marshall exhaled slowly. "I need to see my son. Your visitation is Sunday afternoons, supervised. That's 3 days away." "No, I need to see him now. I need to know he's okay." "Marshall, I'm not doing anything stupid. I'm going to knock on the door like a civilized person and ask to see my son. If they refuse, I'll leave. But I need to look Marcus in the eye and tell him I'm here." Blake was quiet for a moment. "Call me if anything happens. And Marshall, be smart. Don't give them ammunition." Marshall hung up and ordered an Uber. The driver tried to make small talk, but Marshall's silence killed the conversation within 2 blocks. He stared out the window at the Vegas sprawl, the strip malls, and housing developments that had consumed the desert. The house he bought with Stacy was in a subdivision called Desert Willows, a neighborhood of identical beige homes with rock gardens and 2-car garages. The Uber pulled up to 2847 Sandalwood Court. Marshall paid and stepped out, the heat pressing down like a physical weight. The house looked the same brown trim, same gravel landscaping, same basketball hoop over the garage where he'd taught Marcus to shoot. A Henderson PD patrol car sat in the driveway. Trujillo's. Marshall walked to the front door and rang the bell. Footsteps inside. The door opened. Royal Trujillo stood in the doorway, still in his police uniform. Up close, he was taller than Marshall expected. 6'2", maybe 6'3", with the kind of gym-built physique that came from protein shakes and narcissism. His smile was cold. "Marshall Hoffman, heard you were flying in. Surprised you had the balls to show up here." Marshall kept his voice level. "I'm here to see Marcus. Your visitation isn't until Sunday. You know the custody agreement. I know my son was dragged across concrete by his hair. I want to see that he's okay." Trujillo's smile widened. "Marcus is fine. He's at school, learning that actions have consequences. Kid ran into the street, I grabbed him. That's called parenting. Maybe if you'd stuck around instead of playing mercenary in Afghanistan, you'd understand that." Every muscle in Marshall's body wanted to put his fist through Trujillo's face. But he'd learned patience in the Rangers. Learned to wait for the right moment. "I want to see my son. I want a lot of things. Difference is, I've got a badge and a court order that says you only get Marcus on Sundays. So unless you want to add trespassing to your list of bad decisions, I suggest you leave." Behind Trujillo, Marshall caught a glimpse of the living room. The furniture was different. Stacy had redecorated. On the wall was a photograph he didn't recognize. Stacy and Trujillo on a beach somewhere, her in a white dress, him in a suit. They'd gotten married. His ex-wife had married the man who was abusing their son, and she hadn't even told him. "When did you two get married?" Marshall asked. 6 months ago. Beautiful ceremony. Marcus was the ring bearer. Trujillo leaned against the doorframe. "He's mine now, Hoffman. Legally, emotionally, every way that matters. I'm the one who helps with homework. I'm the one who coaches his soccer team. I'm the father figure he needs. You're just a child support check." Marshall took a step back, forcing himself to unclench his fists. I'll see you in court. Looking forward to it. Stacy's lawyer is going to shred you. Absent father, dangerous job, history of PTSD. I don't have PTSD, says you. But when we bring up the counseling you went to after your last deployment, the anger management classes the Army required, the nightmares Stacy documented during your marriage, well, Judge Fields is going to wonder if you're stable enough for unsupervised visitation. Might even decide supervised isn't safe. Marshall hadn't gone to anger management. He'd gone to standard post-deployment counseling, mandatory for all returning soldiers. And the nightmares were Stacy's fiction, created during the divorce to paint him as unstable. But Trujillo was right about one thing. In a courtroom, perception was reality, and a cop's testimony carried weight. I'm done talking to you, Marshall said. Tell Marcus I love him. Sure thing, hero. Trujillo started to close the door, then paused. Oh, and Marshall, that cute little stunt with the Rangers? Delgado and his team? I filed a formal complaint with Fort Liberty. Military personnel interfering with civilian law enforcement. They're looking at Article 15s. So congratulations, you didn't just fuck up your custody case. You fucked up their careers too. The door slammed. Marshall stood on the porch, the Nevada sun beating down, and realized the full scope of what he was up against. Trujillo wasn't just a dirty cop. He was smart, connected, vicious, and he was systematically cutting off every avenue of help, every ally, every legal recourse. His phone buzzed. Text from Donna Goodwin, his neighbor. I'm sorry. HBD detective came by. Said if I testify about what I saw, they'll charge me with filing a false report. I can't lose my house. I'm sorry. So Trujillo had gotten to his witness. Of course he had. Marshall walked back to the street and called a cab. While waiting, he opened his laptop and started researching Judge Caroline Fields. 48 years old, appointed to family court 6 years ago, formerly a prosecutor. 63% of her custody decisions favored mothers. She had a reputation for being harsh on fathers she deemed uncommitted to parenting. The case file from his divorce was brutal reading. Stacy's testimony painted Marshall as a man who chose military service over family, who was emotionally unavailable, who prioritized his career. His attorney had been overworked and underprepared, treating it as a routine divorce. Marshall had been in Iraq when most of the hearings happened, participating by phone, distracted by missions. He'd let Stacy control the narrative. Now that narrative was solidifying into the reality that would determine Marcus's future. And Royal Trujillo was adding layers to it. The unstable veteran, the absent father, the man so desperate he'd send soldiers to intimidate a police officer. The cab arrived. Marshall gave the driver Blake's address. He'd offer to put Marshall up rather than pay for a hotel. During the ride, Marshall made a list. Immediate problems. No way to see Marcus before Sunday. Only witness intimidated into silence. CPS case closed. Trujillo has legal standing as Marcus's stepfather. Court hearing in 2 weeks. Delgado and his team facing discipline. Trujillo's advantages. Badge and police connections. Married to Stacy, legal stepfather status. Clean record officially. Access to resources for intimidation. Attorney already on attack. My advantages. Military training. Blake Howard and his network. Knowledge that Trujillo is corrupt. Need to prove it. The truth. That last one felt hollow. The truth didn't matter if you couldn't prove it. And Trujillo had 12 years of practice making truths disappear. Blake's house was a modest 2-story in Henderson, a 30-minute drive from Stacy's. He opened the door before Marshall knocked. You look like hammered shit. Feel worse. Marshall walked inside. The house was clean, sparse, the home of a career military man. Photos on the wall showed Blake in various deployments, younger and leaner in each successive picture. Beer. Blake offered. Water. Need to stay sharp. They sat at the kitchen table. Blake pulled out a laptop. While you were flying, I kept digging on Trujillo. Found something interesting. Remember I mentioned his side business? Security consulting. Yeah. I pulled records. His LLC is called Trujillo Protection Services. Filed 3 years ago. He's been pulling in significant side income. We're talking six figures. Way more than a cop should be making from consulting. Who are his clients? That's where it gets murky. Most are shell companies. But I traced two of them back to people with interesting backgrounds. One's a nightclub owner who's been investigated twice for drug trafficking. Another is a real estate developer who's currently under federal investigation for fraud. Marshall leaned forward. He's providing security for criminals. More than that, I talked to a buddy in Vegas Metro's organized crime unit. Strictly off record. He says Trujillo's name has come up in multiple investigations as someone who provides information services, meaning he's using his access to police databases to run background checks, surveillance intel, maybe even tipping people off about investigations. That's felony corruption. Yeah, and impossible to prove without someone on the inside willing to testify. These guys don't keep records. It's all cash payments and handshakes. And anyone who might talk is more scared of Trujillo than they are of the law. Marshall stared at the laptop screen. So we know he's dirty, but we can't prove it. And even if we could, it doesn't help with Marcus. The custody hearing is about parenting, not corruption. Unless we can prove Trujillo's illegal activities put Marcus in danger. If he's meeting with criminals at the house, if his corruption creates a threat to the child, that's grounds for emergency custody modification. We need evidence. We need surveillance. Blake closed the laptop, which brings me to something I need to say. Marshall, whatever you're planning, I'm with you. But we do this smart. We don't break into his house. We don't threaten him. We don't do anything that gives him ammunition. We gather evidence legally, we build a case, and we let the system work. Marshall nodded slowly. But inside, a darker thought was forming. The system had failed. CPS had failed. The Henderson PD had failed. Every institution designed to protect children had looked at Marcus's bruises and Dona's video and decided it wasn't enough. Sometimes the system didn't work. Sometimes you had to bypass it entirely. But Blake didn't need to know that yet. I hear you, Marshall said. Legal and smart. But we need to move fast. 2 weeks until the hearing. Already working on it. I've got a PI license for my consulting work. I can legally surveil Trujillo, document his activities, gather evidence. And I've got friends who can help, guys from the unit who've transitioned to civilian investigative work. We'll put together a package that shows Judge Fields exactly who Royal Trujillo is. It was a good plan, a reasonable plan, the kind of plan that might work in a just world. But Marshall had seen too many unjust worlds, had watched warlords escape justice because they knew the right people, had seen corruption so deep that the only way to excise it was surgical violence. He didn't tell Blake any of this. Instead, he said, let's get started. They worked through the night, building a surveillance strategy, mapping Trujillo's known routines, identifying his associates. By dawn, they had the skeleton of an operation. Blake would handle the legal surveillance. Marshall would focus on finding witnesses, people Trujillo had wronged, complaints he'd buried, victims too scared to come forward. But as Marshall finally lay down on Blake's guest bed, his exhausted mind sliding towards sleep, he thought about Trujillo's smile, the casual cruelty, the certainty that his badge made him untouchable. Royal Trujillo had built his life on intimidation and corruption, had risen through the ranks by knowing which rules to bend and which people to threaten. He was a predator who'd learned to wear the uniform of a protector. Marshall had spent his career hunting predators, and he was about to teach Royal Trujillo that sometimes the hunter became the hunted. Sunday afternoon arrived like a slow-motion car crash. Marshall sat in the parking lot of the McDonald's Play Place, the designated supervised visitation location, watching families laugh and eat while his stomach churned with barely contained fury. Stacy had chosen this place deliberately, public, crowded, impossible for him to have a real conversation with Marcus without dozens of witnesses. The supervisor was a tired-looking woman named Megan Donovan, who worked for family services and clearly resented spending her Sunday watching estranged parents interact. She'd already explained the rules. 2 hours, no physical contact beyond a hug at greeting and departure, no discussion of the custody case or Royal Trujillo, no phone calls, or recording devices. She'd sit at the next table with her paperwork, ostensibly giving them privacy while monitoring every word. At 2:03 p.m., Stacy's SUV pulled into the parking lot. Marshall's chest tightened as the passenger door opened and Marcus climbed out. His son looked smaller than Marshall remembered. The bruise on his cheek had faded to a yellow-green shadow. He wore a soccer jersey that Marshall didn't recognize. Royals team, probably. Marcus's eyes scanned the parking lot, found Marshall standing by the entrance, and lit up. "Dad!" The boy started to run, but Stacy's hand caught his shoulder. She said something to him. Marshall couldn't hear from this distance, but Marcus's expression fell. The excitement drained away. By the time they reached the entrance, Marcus was walking slowly, head down, hands in his pockets. 2 hours, Stacy said, not looking at Marshall. She was thinner than he remembered, her auburn hair shorter, her expression harder. He needs to be back in the parking lot at 4:15 exactly. He has homework. On Sunday night, we believe in discipline and structure. Something you wouldn't understand. She glanced down at Marcus. Remember what we talked about? Marcus nodded without speaking. Stacy walked back to the SUV, pulled out her phone, and settled in to wait. Watching, making sure Marshall knew he was being observed. "Hey, buddy." Marshall knelt down to Marcus's eye level. "I missed you." "Hi, Dad." Marcus's voice was small. Megan Donovan cleared her throat. "Why don't you two get some food and find a table? I'll be right nearby." Inside, the chaos of kids screaming in the play structure felt surreal. Marshall ordered 2 Happy Meals without asking what Marcus wanted, chicken nuggets, his son's perennial favorite, and led them to a booth in the corner. Marcus sat down across from him and immediately started shredding his napkin into tiny pieces. "How's school?" Marshall asked. "Fine." "Still like Mrs. Hartman?" "She's okay." Marshall watched his son, searching for signs of injury, of trauma, of anything beyond the fading bruise. But Marcus kept his eyes down, his movements small and controlled, like a kid who'd learned that drawing attention was dangerous. "Marcus, look at me." The boy's eyes flicked up, then away. "I'm not supposed to talk about it." "About what?" Mom said you're trying to take me away from her. That you're making up lies about Royal. She said if I say anything bad about Royal, the judge will think I'm lying and I'll never see you again." Marshall's hands clenched beneath the table. "Your mom said that. Royal said it too. He said soldiers like you sometimes get confused and think everyone's an enemy. He said you have PTSD and that's why you sent those scary men to our house." Marcus finally looked up, his 8-year-old face creased with worry. "Do you have PTSD, Dad? Like the soldiers in movies who freak out?" "No, buddy. I don't. I sent those men because I was worried about you. Because I saw a video of you being hurt. Royal said that was an accident. He said I ran into the street, and he had to grab me fast. He said it looked bad, but he was protecting me." "Did you run into the street?" Marcus's eyes darted toward Megan Donovan. She was studiously looking at her paperwork, but her attention was clearly on them. The boy lowered his voice. "I don't remember." "Marcus." "I don't remember, Dad. That's what I told the CPS lady. I don't remember." The words came out flat, rehearsed. A script that had been drilled into him. Marshall felt his heart break. They'd gotten to his son, had told him what to say, what to believe, how to rewrite his own memories to protect his abuser. He changed tactics. "Tell me about soccer. Are you having fun?" Relief flooded Marcus's face at the safer topic. "Yeah, Royal's coaching my team. We're called the Lightning Bolts. I scored a goal last week. Royal said if I score again next game, he'll take me to get ice cream." "That's great, buddy. And Mom's teaching me to cook. We made spaghetti yesterday. Royal said it was the best spaghetti he ever had." Marcus paused. "Do you like spaghetti?" "Love it. Maybe I could cook it for you sometime. When you're home more." The unsaid accusation hung in the air. "When you're not in Afghanistan. When you're not choosing money over me." They ate in near silence. Marcus picked at his nuggets, asked about the plane ride home, talked about a video game Royal had bought him. Every sentence included Royal's name. Royal this, Royal that. The man had embedded himself so completely into Marcus's life that even casual conversation revolved around him. Finally, with 20 minutes left, Marshall leaned forward. "Marcus, I need you to listen to me." "Can you do that?" The boy nodded. I love you. More than anything in the world. And I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. If anything ever happens, anything that scares you or hurts you, I need you to tell someone. Tell your teacher, tell your friends' parents, tell anyone. Okay. But Marcus wouldn't meet his eyes. And buddy, that video I saw of Royal dragging you. Marcus's face went white. I can't talk about that. Mom said, I know, but I want you to know that wasn't okay. No matter what anyone tells you. Adults aren't supposed to grab kids like that. They're not supposed to leave bruises. And if it happens again, it won't. Marcus's voice was desperate now. It won't happen again because I'm being good. Royal said if I'm good and follow the rules, everything's fine. I just have to be good. The words cut deeper than any knife. My son thinks he deserves to be grabbed and bruised if he's not good enough. Marcus, listen to me. Time's almost up, Megan Donovan said, approaching the table. We need to start wrapping up. Marshall wanted to scream, wanted to grab his son and run, wanted to find Royal Trujillo and make him pay for every moment of fear he'd instilled in this child. Instead, he smiled. Okay, come here, buddy. Marcus slid out of the booth and Marshall pulled him into a hug, careful not to hold too tight, too long. The boy felt fragile in his arms. I love you. I'll see you next Sunday, okay? Okay, Dad. They walked out to the parking lot. Stacy was already standing by the SUV, checking her watch. 4:12. We need to leave. Marshall knelt down one more time. Remember what I said. I love you. Always. Love you too. Marcus climbed into the SUV without looking back. Stacy got in the driver's seat, and through the windshield, Marshall saw her say something to Marcus. The boy's shoulders slumped. Then the SUV pulled away. Marshall stood in the parking lot, watching his son disappear down the street, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. He tried the legal way. He tried the system. He tried being reasonable. And now his 8-year-old son was sitting in a car, probably being told that his father was dangerous, that expressing love for Marshall was disloyalty, that Royal Trujillo was the real parent who mattered. Blake's plan, surveillance, evidence, building a legal case, was good. But it would take time. Weeks, maybe months. And every day Marcus spent in that house was another day of manipulation. Another day of learning that violence was normal, that fear was just part of life. Marshall pulled out his phone and made a call. Luther Murphy. The voice was rough, familiar. It's Marshall Hoffman. I need a favor. Luther Murphy was a legend in certain circles, former Delta Force, now running a private investigation firm that specialized in cases too dirty for traditional agencies. He and Marshall had crossed paths in Afghanistan, had shared a transport convoy through hostile territory, had gotten drunk together in a safe house in Kandahar. They'd stayed in touch sporadically. Hoffman, heard you're back stateside. Blake told me about your situation. Then you know what I need. I know what Blake thinks you need. Legal surveillance, building a court case, playing by the rules. A pause. But that's not why you're calling me. No. You want to know if Royal Trujillo has any skeletons buried deep enough that shaking his tree will make them fall out. Yes. That kind of work costs. And it's not exactly legal. I don't care about legal. I care about my son being safe. Another pause. Marshall could hear Luther thinking. I'll look into it. But Marshall, once we start down this road, you can't walk it back. If Trujillo figures out we're digging into his shit, he'll come at you hard. And he's got resources. So do I. Yeah. Luther's voice carried a grim smile. Yeah, you do. I'll call you in 48 hours. Marshall hung up and got in his rental car. Blake had texted an address. A bar in North Las Vegas where one of Trujillo's former partners from Henderson PD was known to drink. Blake had learned the man, Sterling Blanchard, had left the force under murky circumstances 2 years ago, right after working with Trujillo on a high-profile case. The bar was a dive called Lucky's, all neon beer signs and cracked vinyl booths. Marshall found Sterling at the end of the bar, nursing a whiskey that probably wasn't his first of the day. He was in his 50s, paunchy, with the red nose of a dedicated alcoholic. When Marshall sat down next to him, Sterling didn't even look up. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. I'm not selling. I'm asking about Royal Trujillo. That got Sterling's attention. He turned, eyes narrowed. Who are you? Someone he fucked over. Heard you might have your own reasons to dislike him. Sterling laughed bitterly. Dislike. That's a word. You know what Royal Trujillo is? He's a cancer. Spreads through the department, corrupts everyone he touches, and by the time you realize you're infected, it's too late to cut it out. Tell me. Sterling drained his whiskey and signaled for another. The bartender poured without comment. I was his partner for 4 years. Good years at first. Then Royal started his consulting business. Started having private meetings. Started asking me to look the other way on certain traffic stops, certain investigations. I told him no. I might be a drunk now, but I was a good cop then. What happened? He planted drugs in my patrol car. Called in an anonymous tip. Internal Affairs found 6 ounces of cocaine in my trunk. I had 2 choices, retire with my pension and shut the fuck up, or fight it and lose everything. Sterling's hand shook as he raised the glass. I took the pension, moved out here, started drinking, and Royal's still out there, wearing his badge, playing hero. You have proof he planted the drugs? I have my word against this. Guess whose word the department believed? Sterling looked at Marshall directly for the first time. Why are you asking about Royal? He's married to my ex-wife. He's hurting my son. Understanding dawned in Sterling's eyes. Kid with dark hair? About 8 years old? I saw him once when I ran into Royal at the grocery store. Royal was grabbing the kid's arm hard enough to leave marks right there in public. Kid looked terrified. When was this? A month ago, maybe. I almost said something, but... Sterling gestured at himself. Who's going to believe a drunk ex-cop? Marshall pulled out his phone, navigated to his notes app. What if your testimony was part of a larger pattern? Multiple witnesses, multiple incidents, documented corruption. You think you're going to bring down Royal Trujillo with some witnesses and a custody case? He's bulletproof. The union protects him. The chief protects him. The whole goddamn system protects him. Then I'll burn down the system. Sterling studied him. You're military. Blake Howard's friend. He mentioned you might come by. Look, I get it. You want a kid safe. But going up against Royal isn't like a firefight where you shoot the enemy and go home. He'll destroy your life piece by piece. He'll turn your son against you. He'll make sure you never see the kid again. He can try. He'll succeed. I've seen him do it before. Sterling leaned closer. 3 years ago, there was another cop who crossed Royal. Guy named Roscoe Mercer. Started asking questions about Royal's consulting business, wondering why certain arrests were getting kicked loose by the DA. Roscoe was a Boy Scout, thought the system would protect him if he reported corruption. What happened to him? Royal and his friends started a whisper campaign. Said Roscoe was skimming from evidence seizures. Planted just enough circumstantial evidence to make it stick. Roscoe got fired, lost his pension, his wife divorced him. Last I heard, he was living in a trailer park in Pahrump, working security at a casino. Marshall memorized the name. Another witness. Another piece of the puzzle. Where in Pahrump? You're not hearing me. Roscoe's broken. He won't help you. Nobody will help you. Royal Trujillo is untouchable. Give me the address anyway. Sterling scribbled on a napkin. Sunset Mobile Home Park, Lot 47. But you're wasting your time. Marshall stood up, dropped a 50 on the bar. Thanks for the drink. Hey, Sterling's voice stopped him. If you actually manage to fuck up Royal's life, if you somehow pull off a miracle and make him pay, I want to know about it. I want to watch that smug bastard burn. I'll send you an invitation. Marshall walked out into the Vegas heat. His phone buzzed. Text from Blake, getting some good surveillance footage of Trujillo meeting with known criminals. This might actually work. Marshall didn't respond. Blake's approach might work. Might. If Judge Caroline Fields believed the evidence. If Trujillo's lawyers didn't find a way to explain it away. If the system suddenly decided to work the way it was supposed to. But Marshall had seen enough broken systems to know better. Sometimes justice didn't come from courts and judges. Sometimes it came from making a man's crimes so public, so undeniable, that even his protectors couldn't shield him. He drove out to Pahrump, a desert town 40 miles west of Vegas where the failed and forgotten went to disappear. The Sunset Mobile Home Park was exactly as depressing as the name suggested. Rows of aging trailers, rusted cars on blocks, broken air conditioners dripping rust-colored water on a bare dirt. Lot 47 was a faded beige single-wide. An old pickup truck sat outside. Marshall knocked. The man who answered the door looked 10 years older than his probable age. Roscoe Mercer was maybe 45, but could have passed for 60. Prison tattoos on his forearms, a scar across his left cheek, eyes that had seen too much and believed in nothing. If you're selling Jesus, I'm not interested. I'm selling revenge against Royal Trujillo. Roscoe's expression didn't change, but his grip on the door tightened. Don't know him. Yet you do. He's the reason you're living here instead of drawing a pension. The reason your life went to shit 3 years ago. The reason you wake up every morning hating yourself. Who the fuck are you? Someone else he fucked over. Someone who's going to make him pay. And I need witnesses who'll testify to his corruption. Roscoe laughed. A hollow, broken sound. Testify, right? Like the system gives a shit about corrupt cops. Like anyone ever pays for that shit, except the guys stupid enough to speak up. He started to close the door. He's hurting my 8-year-old son, Marshall said quietly. The door stopped. Roscoe stared at him. Hurting how? Grabbing him, dragging him, bruising him, and using his badge to make sure nobody stops him. Something flickered in Roscoe's eyes. Not quite hope, but something close. You got proof. Video. Witness testimony. Medical examiner could document old injuries if we get access. But I need people who will testify to Royal's pattern of behavior. Show the judge he's not the upstanding cop he pretends to be. Judge won't care. System won't care. Maybe not. But I'm not just going through the courts. Marshall met Roscoe's eyes. I'm going to destroy him. Every dirty deal, every buried complaint, every skeleton in his closet. I'm going to drag it all into the light. And when I'm done, Royal Trujillo won't have a badge, a career, or his freedom. He'll have nothing. Big talk. I spent 12 years hunting bad guys in bad places. Royal Trujillo's just another target. Only difference is, this time it's personal. Roscoe studied him for a long moment. Then come inside. The trailer was sparse, but clean. Photos on the walls showed Roscoe in his police uniform, younger and prouder. His ex-wife, smiling. A daughter, maybe 12 or 13. Haven't seen my kid in 2 years, Roscoe said, following Marshall's gaze. When Royal destroyed my career, my ex got full custody. Court said I was an unfit parent. Drug test came back clean, but they said I had character issues. My daughter believes I'm a corrupt cop who stole from evidence. Royal made sure that story got to her. Help me, and we can set the record straight. Ow! Marshall laid it out. The custody hearing. Blake's surveillance operation. Luther Murphy's deep dive into Trujillo's criminal connections. Sterling Blanchard's testimony. And Roscoe, a former cop who could speak to Royal's pattern of corruption, intimidation, and frame-ups. You're building a RICO case, Roscoe said slowly. Not just custody. You're trying to prove organized corruption. If I can show Royal's dirty enough, the judge has to consider Marcus's safety. Has to question whether a corrupt cop is a fit parent. And if the judge doesn't care, Marshall smiled cold and hard. Then I moved to plan B, which is making sure Royal Trujillo is too busy defending himself against criminal charges to worry about my son. Roscoe sat back. You know, once you start this, you can't stop. Royal's connected. He's got friends in the DA's office, in the police union, in city government. They'll all circle wagons to protect him. Let them. They'll come after you. Dig into your past. Find anything they can use. They'll paint you as an unstable veteran, a danger to your kid. They'll try to destroy you the way they destroyed me. I've been shot at by actual terrorists. I'm not scared of corrupt cops. Roscoe laughed again, but this time it had some life in it. All right, I'm in, but I want something in return. Name it. When this is over, if you actually pull this off, I want my story told. I want people to know I wasn't a corrupt cop. I want my daughter to know the truth. Deal. They shook hands. Marshall drove back to Las Vegas as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of red and gold. His phone rang. Luther Murphy. I've got something, Luther said without preamble. Trujillo's security consulting? It's a front. He's been providing intel to a drug distribution network. Names, addresses, investigation details. Everything they need to stay one step ahead of the DEA. Can you prove it? Working on it. But here's the thing. One of his clients is Vincent Cordova. You know that name? Marshall did. Vincent Cordova ran half the drug trade in southern Nevada, with suspected connections to cartels in Mexico. Multiple investigations had failed to stick anything to him. Trujillo's working for Cordova for the last 18 months. Cordova's paying him cash, off the books. I've got bank records showing regular deposits of $15K into an offshore account in the Caymans. The account's buried under shell companies, but I traced it back to Trujillo. How'd you get bank records? You don't want to know. Point is, if this gets to the right people, the FBI, Internal Affairs at Henderson PD, the Nevada Attorney General, Royal Trujillo's looking at federal charges. RICO, corruption, conspiracy. We're talking 20 years minimum. Can we get this evidence to them before the custody hearing? Not legally. Everything I've got is from illegal sources. The second I hand it over, it's fruit of the poison tree. Inadmissible. Marshall thought fast. What if someone else discovered it? Someone with legal authority to access financial records. Like who? Blake Howard's connected. He might know someone at the FBI who's already looking at Cordova. If we can point them in the right direction without revealing our illegal sources. It's a long shot. FBI investigations take months. Then we'll make them move faster. Marshall hung up and called Blake. Explained Luther's findings. Blake was quiet for a long moment. You're playing with fire, Blake finally said. If Trujillo finds out we're digging into his connection to Cordova, he'll kill you. Not metaphorically. Literally. Vincent Cordova doesn't mess around. Neither do I. Marshall, my son's in that house, Blake. Every day I waste. Marcus is learning to accept abuse as normal. Learning to fear the people who should protect him. I can't wait for the system to maybe, possibly, eventually decide to care. I need Royal Trujillo out of that house and behind bars. Blake sighed. I've got a contact at the FBI, woman named Pearl Marquez. She's been trying to nail Cordova for 3 years. If I tell her there's a Henderson PD officer on Cordova's payroll, she'll open an investigation. But Marshall, you need to understand what you're starting. This goes beyond custody. You're taking on organized crime. Good? Let's burn it all down. The week before the custody hearing moved with the speed of an avalanche. Blake reached out to FBI agent Pearl Marquez, carefully feeding her just enough information to point her investigation toward Royal Trujillo without revealing Luther's illegal intelligence gathering. Pearl was a 20-year veteran, smart enough to recognize a gift when she saw it, pragmatic enough not to ask too many questions about sources. Within 48 hours, the FBI had opened a parallel investigation into Henderson PD corruption, with Royal Trujillo as a person of interest. It wasn't enough for immediate arrest. Federal cases moved slowly, building brick by brick, but it was a start. Meanwhile, Blake surveillance had documented 12 meetings between Trujillo and known associates of Vincent Cordova. Videos showed Trujillo passing manila envelopes, accepting packages, meeting in parking garages and vacant lots. The footage was damning, but without audio or access to the package's contents, it was merely suspicious, not conclusive. Marshall spent his days tracking down more witnesses. He found 2 other cops who'd worked with Trujillo and left the force under murky circumstances. One refused to talk. The other, Bennett Warren, agreed to testify about Trujillo's pattern of intimidation and corruption, but only if granted immunity from any charges related to his own questionable actions while partnered with Trujillo. Marshall also contacted the man whose wife had filed an excessive force complaint against Trujillo 3 years ago. The man, Tracy Weiss, had moved to Oregon to escape, but he agreed to provide a written statement detailing how Trujillo had beaten him during a traffic stop, then threatened to plant evidence if he didn't drop the complaint. The pattern was clear. Royal Trujillo was a violent, corrupt cop who'd spent years using his badge as a license for abuse. But patterns weren't proof, and proof wasn't always enough in family court. On Thursday, Marshall finally received the news he'd been waiting for and dreading. Pearl Marquez called Blake, who conferenced Marshall, Indiana. "We've got enough for a warrant," Pearl said. Her voice was crisp, professional. Financial records, surveillance footage, testimony from a confidential informant inside Cordova's organization. We're moving on Trujillo tomorrow morning. Before the custody hearing, Marshall asked. The hearing was Monday. The hearing's not my concern. My concern is taking down a corrupt cop before he tips off Cordova that we're coming. We're hitting Trujillo's house at 6 a.m. He'll be arrested, arraigned, and held pending trial. Given the severity of the charges, corruption, conspiracy, providing material support to a criminal enterprise, bail will be substantial. If he can't make it, he'll be in custody through your hearing. Marshall felt a surge of savage satisfaction. What about my ex-wife? What about Marcus? Child services will be notified. If Trujillo's arrested at the residence and a minor child is present, CPS will investigate. But Mr. Hoffman, I need to be clear, this arrest is about federal corruption charges. It's not about your custody case. Don't expect CPS to automatically grant you custody just because Trujillo's arrested. But it helps. It doesn't hurt. Pearl's tone softened slightly. Look, I got kids. If half of what Blake told me is true, your son shouldn't be anywhere near Trujillo. But I can't manipulate a federal investigation to help your custody case. I can only do my job. Your job's enough. Friday morning, Marshall sat in Blake's kitchen with coffee he couldn't taste, watching the clock crawl towards 6 a.m. Blake had contacts inside the FBI operation, not officially but through back channels and old friendships. They'd know the moment the arrest went down. At 6:11 a.m., Blake's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, thanked the caller, hung up, and looked at Marshall. They've got him. Trujillo was arrested without incident. They're searching the house now. CPS is on scene. Marcus and your ex-wife are being interviewed. Marshall exhaled slowly. Is Marcus okay? He's scared but unharmed. CPS is placing him with your ex-wife temporarily while they investigate. Not with me. You're not the custodial parent. Yet. But Marshall, this changes everything. Judge Fields can't ignore that Marcus's stepfather was just arrested on federal corruption charges. Your lawyer needs to file an emergency motion for immediate custody. Marshall was already dialing. His attorney, a bulldog named Genevieve Hartman, who Blake had recommended, answered on the first ring. I heard, she said. I'm already drafting the motion. We're going to argue that Marcus is in immediate danger if he remains in Stacy's custody, given that she knowingly allowed a corrupt cop with violent tendencies access to the child. We'll request emergency custody with you pending Monday's hearing. Will Fields grant it? She might. The optics are bad. If something happens to Marcus this weekend and she didn't act, it's on her. But Stacy's going to fight it. She'll argue Trujillo's arrest is unrelated to his parenting, that you orchestrated this to manipulate the court, that Marcus shouldn't be uprooted in a moment of crisis. She'll lie. She'll lawyer. But we've got momentum. I'll file within the hour. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. that same day. Marshall sat in the courtroom, watching Judge Caroline Fields review the motion with an expression that gave nothing away. Stacy sat across the aisle with her attorney, Sterling Blanchard, Royal's friend, the same lawyer who'd threatened harassment charges. Stacy looked shell-shocked, her eyes red from crying. For a moment, Marshall almost felt sorry for her. Then he remembered Marcus's face at McDonald's. The careful way his son had avoided eye contact. The rehearsed words. The fear. Sympathy evaporated. Mr. Blanchard, Judge Fields said, your client's husband was arrested this morning on federal corruption charges. Serious charges. And there's video evidence of him physically abusing Mrs. Gregory's son. Why shouldn't I grant Mr. Hoffman emergency custody? Your Honor, my client had no knowledge of any alleged illegal activities by Mr. Trujillo. She's a schoolteacher, not a criminal investigator. As for the video, that incident was investigated by CPS and found to be a disciplinary action that, while poorly executed, did not rise to abuse. Mr. Trujillo has since moved out of the residence as a condition of his bail. He made bail. Marshall hissed to Genevieve. Union posted it, she whispered back. $250,000. And Mrs. Gregory has been fully cooperative with authorities, Sterling continued. More importantly, Marcus has lived with his mother his entire life. She's his primary caregiver. Mr. Hoffman, with all respect, has been absent for significant periods due to his overseas employment. Removing Marcus from his mother at this traumatic time would only compound the child's distress. Judge Fields turned to Genevieve. Ms. Hartman, Your Honor, the issue isn't Mr. Trujillo's criminal activities per se. The issue is Mrs. Gregory's judgment. She married a man who is now facing decades in prison for corruption. She allowed that man unsupervised access to her son. She witnessed, and according to her own statements to CPS, helped facilitate the manipulation of Marcus to recant his testimony about abuse. She chose this man over her child's safety. That's not a mother who should have custody. Mrs. Gregory, would you like to address the court? Judge Fields asked. Stacy stood, her voice shaking. Your Honor, I love my son. Everything I've done has been to provide him with a stable home. I thought Royal was a good man. A police officer, someone trustworthy. How was I supposed to know he was that he'd? She broke down crying. Sterling put a hand on her shoulder, let her compose herself. Your Honor, my client is a victim here too. She's been deceived by Mr. Trujillo, manipulated into believing his version of events. She's devastated by his arrest. But that doesn't make her an unfit mother. Marcus needs his mother right now, not to be handed off to a father he sees 2 hours a week in supervised visits. Judge Fields was silent for a long moment, studying the documents before her. Finally, here's my ruling. Mr. Hoffman, I'm granting you temporary custody effective immediately, pending Monday's full hearing. Mrs. Gregory, you'll have supervised visitation tomorrow, Sunday, same terms as Mr. Hoffman has had. Marcus will be placed with his father for the weekend. Monday at 9 a.m., we'll have a comprehensive hearing on permanent custody arrangements. Both parties will present their full cases. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Genevieve said. Sterling started to object, but Stacy put a hand on his arm. It's okay, she said quietly. Maybe Marshall should have him for a few days. I can't, her voice broke. I can't think straight right now. Judge Fields nodded. CPS will facilitate the transfer. Mr. Hoffman, you'll pick up Marcus from the CPS office at 5 p.m. today. He'll need his belongings, medications if any, school supplies. Mrs. Gregory, please cooperate fully with this transition. The gavel fell. Marshall walked out of the courthouse in a daze. He'd won. Not permanently. Not yet, but for the first time in 18 months, he'd have his son for more than 2 supervised hours. He'd have Marcus in his home, safe, away from Royal Trujillo. Don't celebrate yet, Genevieve warned. Monday's hearing is going to be brutal. Sterling's going to paint you as a manipulative father who orchestrated Trujillo's arrest to win custody. He'll bring up your PTSD. I don't have PTSD. He'll argue you do. He'll question your fitness, your stability, your ability to provide consistent parenting given your career. We need to be ready. We will be. At 5 p.m., Marshall arrived at the CPS office. Marcus was sitting in a waiting room with a social worker, a small suitcase beside him. When he saw Marshall, the boy's face lit up with confusion and hope. Dad? What's happening? Marshall knelt down. You're coming to stay with me for a few days, buddy. Just until Monday. Is Mom okay? She's fine. There's some grown-up stuff happening, and the judge thought it would be good for you to stay with me. Is that okay? Marcus nodded slowly. Is Royal going to be there? No. Royal's not going to be anywhere near you. Relief flooded the boy's face. Good. I don't like Royal anymore. He's mean. The social worker handed Marshall a folder. Here's his medical information, school schedule, list of allergies. There's a follow-up appointment with a child psychologist on Monday afternoon. CPS wants to evaluate Marcus's mental state given everything that's happened. We'll be there. They walked out to Marshall's rental car. Marcus climbed into the back seat, buckled himself in, and stared out the window without speaking. Marshall started driving toward Blake's house. He'd been crashing in the guest room, but Blake had already offered to vacate for the weekend to give them space. Dad, Marcus said quietly. Yeah, buddy. Royal got arrested, didn't he? Yes. For hurting me? Marshall met his son's eyes in the rearview mirror. For doing bad things. Hurting you was part of it. Mom said I imagined it. That Royal didn't hurt me. That I was making it up for attention. Mom was wrong. Royal did hurt you. And that's not okay. Adults aren't supposed to hurt kids. Royal said I deserved it. Said I was being disrespectful. Marshall's hands tightened on the wheel. You didn't deserve it. Nobody deserves to be hurt like that. Royal was wrong. Your mom was wrong. And I'm sorry I wasn't there to protect you. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then, are you going to stay now? Or are you going back to Afghanistan? I'm staying. I'm not going anywhere, buddy. I promise. The tears came then, months of pent-up fear and confusion and pain spilling out. Marshall pulled into a parking lot, climbed into the back seat, and held his son while he cried. Marcus sobbed into his shoulder, his small body shaking, and Marshall whispered reassurances and apologies and promises. When the tears finally subsided, Marcus pulled back, wiping his eyes. Can we get ice cream? Marshall laughed. Actual, genuine laughter for the first time in weeks. Yeah, we can get ice cream. They drove to a local parlor, got double scoops, sat at a picnic table in the Vegas heat. Marcus talked about school, about a friend named Tyler who'd stuck up for him when another kid teased him about a science project on volcanoes. Normal kid conversation, the kind Marshall had been starved for. That night, they set up Marcus in Blake's guest room. Marshall read him a story, one of the Harry Potter books Marcus was working through, and tucked him in. Dad, yeah, I heard Mom talking to Royal before he got arrested. She said you were trying to steal me away. Is that true? I'm not trying to steal you. I'm trying to keep you safe. Royal said you didn't really want me, that you just wanted to hurt Mom. Royal said a lot of things that weren't true. Marshall sat on the edge of the bed. Marcus, I love you more than anything in the world. I know I've been gone a lot, and I know that hurt you. I'm sorry for that, but I never stopped wanting to be your dad. Never stopped fighting to be part of your life. Are you going to win? On Monday, I'm going to do everything I can. What if you don't? What if I have to go back to Mom's? Then I'll keep fighting. But Marcus, I need you to tell the truth on Monday. Whatever the judge asks you, whatever anyone asks you, tell the truth about what happened with Royal, about how he treated you. Can you do that? Fear flickered across Marcus's face. Mom said if I told the judge bad things about Royal, I'd never see you again. Mom was wrong. The judge wants to hear the truth. She wants to know what really happened so she can decide what's best for you. And telling the truth is always the right thing, even when it's scary. Marcus thought about this. Then, okay, I'll tell the truth. That's my brave boy. Marshall kissed his forehead. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll do something fun. Like what? Whatever you want. Marshall left the door cracked open and walked out to the living room. Blake had returned, was sitting on the couch with a beer. How's he doing? Better. Scared, but better. Marshall collapsed into a chair. Blake, I need to prepare for Monday. Genevieve said Sterling's going to come at me hard. What I need to know. Everything. Your deployment history, your finances, your living situation, your plans for Marcus's schooling. They're going to paint you as unstable and unprepared. You need to show you're exactly the opposite. They spent the next 2 hours strategizing. Blake pulled up Marcus's school records. The boy was struggling in math but excelling in reading. Marshall needed a plan for tutoring. They researched pediatricians in the area, found one accepting new patients. Mapped out a routine, wake-up time, homework time, dinner, bed. Showed that Marshall had thought through every detail of Marcus's daily life. What about your job? Blake asked. You gonna keep contracting? No, I'm done overseas. I've got enough saved to last 6 months, maybe longer. I'll find something local. Security, consulting, training, something that keeps me stateside. Good. Judge will ask about employment stability. Have an answer ready. Marshall's phone buzzed. Luther Murphy. Turn on the news, Luther said. Channel 8. Marshall grabbed the remote. The local news was showing footage of Royal Trujillo being led out of the federal courthouse in handcuffs. The headline read, Henderson officer charged in corruption scheme. The reporter was mid-sentence. Allegations that Officer Trujillo provided confidential law enforcement information to drug traffickers in exchange for cash payments. FBI sources confirm this is part of a larger investigation into corruption within the Henderson Police Department. Trujillo's attorney declined comment, but sources say he's maintaining his innocence. The next shot showed Stacy being interviewed outside the courthouse, looking devastated. I had no idea. I thought Royal was a good man. If I'd known, she broke down. She's already spinning it. Blake said, playing the victim. Let her, Marshall replied. Every interview she gives is one more reminder that she married a corrupt cop and let him near Marcus. The news segment ended with a statement from Henderson PD. We take allegations of corruption extremely seriously. Officer Trujillo has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the federal investigation. We're cooperating fully with the FBI. Luther came back on the line. This is going viral. Local and national coverage. Your custody case is about to become very public. I don't care about publicity. I care about Marcus. Publicity helps. Public pressure means Judge Fields has to be seen doing the right thing. She can't sweep this under the rug or give Stacy custody without looking like she's ignoring a child's safety. Marshall thanked him and hung up. Checked on Marcus. The boy was asleep, actually asleep, without the nightmare-tense expression he'd had at McDonald's. Marshall watched him for a moment, his son's chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm, and felt something unclench in his own chest. For the first time in months, Marcus was safe. But safe for a weekend wasn't the same as safe forever. Monday's hearing would determine everything. And Sterling Blanchard wasn't going to go down without a fight. Sunday's supervised visitation with Stacy was painful in ways Marshall hadn't anticipated. They met at the same McDonald's, with the same supervisor, but now Marcus clung to Marshall's side and refused to go near his mother without prompting. Stacy looked worse than she had in court. Hollow-eyed, her clothes rumpled, her hair unwashed. She tried to smile when Marcus finally walked over, but it was a broken, desperate expression. Hey baby, she said. I missed you. Hi Mom. Marcus's voice was flat. Did you have fun with Daddy? Yeah. What did you do? Stuff. The conversation limped along like that for 90 minutes. Stacy tried every angle, asking about school, about his favorite video games, about whether he wanted to come home. Marcus answered in monosyllables, his body language closed off. Finally, Stacy started crying. Marcus, please. I'm your mom. I love you. I didn't know Royal was. I didn't know what he was doing. You knew he hurt me. Marcus said quietly. You told me I was lying. I was confused. Royal said. He made it sound like. You chose him over me. The words hit like a sledgehammer. Stacy recoiled. That's not true. I chose what I thought was best for our family. Royal's not my family. Dad is. Marshall wanted to intervene, to smooth over the moment, but Genevieve had coached him. Let Marcus speak his truth. The supervisor will document it. It'll help on Monday. Sure enough, Megan Donovan was writing detailed notes. When the 2 hours ended, Marcus practically ran back to Marshall. Stacy stood in the parking lot, watching them drive away. And for a moment, Marshall saw her as she'd been years ago, his wife, the mother of his child, the woman he'd once loved. Before Royal, before the divorce, before everything broke. But then he remembered the video, remembered Marcus's bruises, remembered that she'd chosen to believe Royal over her own son. Whatever sympathy he might have felt evaporated. That night, Marshall and Marcus made pizza from scratch, a disaster of flour and sauce and laughter. They watched a movie, played video games, talked about everything and nothing. Marcus asked about the army, about Afghanistan, about whether Marshall had ever been scared in combat. All the time, Marshall admitted, being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Is that what you're doing now? With the judge? Yeah, buddy. That's exactly what I'm doing. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Marshall dressed in his best suit. He'd bought it years ago for promotion ceremonies, barely worn since. Marcus wore khakis and a button-down shirt that Blake had helped pick out. They looked like they were going to a funeral. In a way, they were the funeral of Marshall's old life, where he existed on the periphery of his son's world. Today would determine if he could step back into the center. The courthouse was already packed. News vans lined the street. Marshall recognized Sterling Blanchard arriving with Stacy, both of them surrounded by reporters. Blake had come from moral support, along with Roscoe Mercer and Bennett Warren, the former cops ready to testify against Trujillo. Luther Murphy had sent a package to Genevieve, comprehensive documentation of Trujillo's corruption, his connections to Vincent Cordova, his offshore accounts. It was all technically inadmissible due to how it was obtained, but it could be referenced in arguments, used to impeach Trujillo's character if he somehow testified. They filed into the courtroom. Judge Caroline Fields took the bench, her expression severe. This hearing is to determine permanent custody arrangements for Marcus Hoffman. I've reviewed all filings, and I'm prepared to hear testimony. Ms. Hartman, call your first witness. The petitioner calls Marshall Hoffman. Marshall took the stand, swore to tell the truth. Genevieve led him through his background. 12 years Army, honorable discharge, transition to contracting work, the reasons he'd taken overseas assignments, to pay child support and legal fees. She asked about his plans for Marcus's care, his employment prospects, his living situation. Marshall answered clearly, confidently, presenting himself as a father who'd made mistakes but was committed to making things right. Then Sterling Blanchard stood for cross-examination. Mr. Hoffman, you've been overseas for 6 of the last 18 months, correct? Yes. During that time, how many times did you see your son in person? Twice. I came home for holidays. 2 times in 6 months. Did you call him? Weekly. Weekly. Not daily. The time difference and work schedule made daily calls difficult. But possible. You chose not to prioritize daily contact with your son. Sterling let that hang. Mr. Hoffman, you allege that my client's husband abused Marcus. Yet you never filed a formal complaint until recently. Why? I was overseas when the abuse occurred. I contacted authorities as soon as I learned of it. Learned of it through a video sent by a neighbor. Did you verify that video's authenticity? The bruises on my son's face verified its authenticity. Those bruises were investigated by CPS and determined to be the result of an accident. Do you disagree with CPS's professional assessment? Genevieve stood. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained. Judge Fields said. Sterling pivoted. Mr. Hoffman, did you orchestrate the arrest of Royal Trujillo to influence this custody hearing? No. Did you have any contact with FBI agent Pearl Marquez prior to Mr. Trujillo's arrest? My friend Blake Howard spoke with her. At your request, I asked him to share information about Trujillo's corruption. So you did influence the investigation. I provided information that helped expose a corrupt cop. I'd do it again. Sterling smiled. You'd do it again. Would you say you have an obsessive focus on destroying Royal Trujillo? I have a focus on protecting my son. By any means necessary? By legal means. Is sending military personnel to confront a civilian police officer legal? They conducted a welfare check, which is legal. At your behest, circumventing normal channels. Mr. Hoffman, you spent 12 years in combat zones. Have you been diagnosed with PTSD? No. Have you sought counseling for combat-related stress? Standard post-deployment counseling required by the Army. But you did seek counseling for issues related to combat stress. And during your marriage to Mrs. Gregory, she documented instances of nightmares, sleeplessness, irritability, all symptoms of PTSD. Yet you claim you don't have it. Marshall kept his voice level. I went to mandatory counseling. I experienced normal adjustment challenges after deployment. I do not have PTSD. Those claims were fabricated during the divorce. Fabricated. So your ex-wife is lying. She was persuaded to lie by her attorney. Sterling's smile widened. So everyone who disagrees with you is either lying or corrupt. Convenient. Objection, Genevieve said. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. Move on, Mr. Blanchard. The cross-examination continued for another hour. Sterling chipping away at Marshall's credibility, painting him as obsessed, unstable, willing to manipulate law enforcement for personal gain. By the time Marshall stepped down, he felt flayed. Next, Stacy took the stand. Her testimony was careful, coached. She admitted she'd been wrong about Royal, but maintained she'd had no knowledge of his corruption or abuse. She talked about her years raising Marcus, about being the stable parent, about Marshall's absences. She cried at strategic moments. Then Genevieve began her cross. Mrs. Gregory, you testified you had no knowledge of Mr. Trujillo's abuse of Marcus. Yet CPS reports indicate you told them the video of Marcus being dragged was normal discipline. Is that correct? I was repeating what Royal told me. So, you didn't investigate yourself? Didn't ask Marcus what happened. I asked. He said he didn't remember. Did you coach him to say that? No. Did Mr. Trujillo coach him? Stacy hesitated. Royal talked to Marcus. Explained that the situation had been misunderstood. Misunderstood? Your husband dragged your 8-year-old son by his hair across concrete, and you allowed him to explain it to the child. Did you ever consider that Marcus was too frightened to tell the truth? I believed Royal that it was an accident. Even though your neighbor called 911 3 times? Even though your son had bruises? You believed your husband of 6 months over your son of 8 years. Stacy's composure cracked. I didn't know what to believe. Royal was convincing. He's a cop. He seemed trustworthy. More trustworthy than your own child. Objection, Sterling said. Badgering. I'll move on. Genevieve said smoothly. Mrs. Gregory, were you aware that Mr. Trujillo had previous excessive force complaints filed against him? No. Were you aware he was under investigation for corruption? No. Were you aware he'd forced his previous partner to retire by planting drugs in his patrol car? Objection. Sterling shot up. Those are unproven allegations. I'm establishing what Mrs. Gregory knew or should have known about the man she married and gave access to her son. Your Honor, we have testimony from multiple sources about Mr. Trujillo's pattern of behavior. Judge Fields considered. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Miss Hartman. The testimony continued. Genevieve methodically destroyed Stacy's credibility, showing she'd either willfully ignored red flags or was dangerously naive. By the end, Stacy was in tears, her carefully constructed image of the caring mother shattered. Then came the character witnesses. Roscoe Mercer testified about Trujillo's corruption and pattern of abuse. Bennett Warren corroborated. Tracy Weiss's written statement was entered into evidence. Each one built a picture of Royal Trujillo as a violent, manipulative predator who'd used his badge to avoid consequences. Finally, the court-appointed psychologist who'd evaluated Marcus testified. His assessment was damning. Marcus showed signs of emotional abuse, anxiety, and learned helplessness consistent with living in an abusive household. The psychologist's recommendation was clear. Marcus needed to be removed from any environment where Royal Trujillo had access. Sterling fought back with his own witnesses. Neighbors who testified that Stacy was a loving mother. Teachers who said Marcus had always seemed happy at school. Character witnesses who vouched for Trujillo before his arrest. But it felt desperate, a defense against overwhelming evidence. At 4 p.m., Judge Fields called for a recess. I'll issue my ruling tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Court is adjourned. Marshall walked out of the courthouse in a daze. Reporters swarmed, but Blake and Genevieve hustled him to the car. Marcus was already buckled in. He'd been kept in a separate room during testimony, spared from hearing the details of adult failures and corruption. How'd it go? Marcus asked. Good, I think, Marshall said. We'll know tomorrow. That night, Marshall couldn't sleep. He lay awake in Blake's guest room, replaying every moment of testimony, every argument, every look on Judge Fields' face. Had he done enough? Had the truth been sufficient? Or would the system fail again? Would Marcus be sent back to Stacy because judges defaulted to mothers, because Royal's arrest didn't erase 18 months of custody precedent? At 3 a.m., his phone buzzed. Luther Murphy. Turn on your TV. Channel 5. Marshall walked into the living room, flipped on the news. Breaking story, Vincent Cordova had been arrested, along with 18 members of his organization. FBI raids across southern Nevada. And in the footage, clear as day, was Royal Trujillo's name on documents seized from Cordova's operations. The reporter spoke breathlessly. Sources indicate Officer Trujillo provided intelligence that led to multiple murders, drug trafficking operations, and the corruption of other law enforcement personnel. The FBI is calling this one of the largest corruption cases in Nevada history. Marshall called Luther back. How much of this did you engineer? Enough. Pearl Marquez moved fast once she had the evidence. Cordova's organization is done. And Trujillo? He's looking at federal conspiracy to commit murder charges on top of everything else. He's never getting out. And the custody case? Judge Fields is going to see the news. She's going to realize that letting Marcus anywhere near Stacy means letting him near the orbit of this shitstorm. Marshall, you've won. You've won, and you've destroyed Royal Trujillo, so completely he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Congratulations. Marshall should have felt triumphant, should have felt vindicated. Instead, he just felt tired. Thanks, Luther. Send me your bill. Consider it a gift. I've got a kid too. What you did, making sure yours is safe, that matters. Marshall hung up and went back to bed. This time he slept. Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. The courtroom was packed. Press, spectators, everyone who'd followed the case. Marcus sat with Megan Donovan in the hallway, spared from hearing the verdict in person. Marshall sat at the plaintiff's table, Genevieve beside him. Across the aisle, Stacy and Sterling Blanchard waited. Judge Caroline Fields took the bench, her expression unreadable. She shuffled papers, reviewed notes, then looked up. I've reviewed all testimony and evidence. This is one of the most troubling cases I've encountered in family court. A child was placed in danger, not through neglect or poverty, but through the active choices of adults who should have protected him. Stacy wiped her eyes. Mrs. Gregory, I find that you failed in your fundamental duty as a parent. You married a man without adequately vetting his character. You ignored evidence of abuse. You coached your son to recant truthful testimony. Whether through naivety or willful blindness, you placed your son in harm's way. That is unacceptable. Sterling started to stand, but Stacy put a hand on his arm. Mr. Hoffman, your record as a parent is imperfect. You chose employment that kept you overseas for extended periods. You were not present for significant portions of your son's life. However, the evidence shows that when you learned of the danger to Marcus, you acted decisively. You used your resources and training to protect him, and you've demonstrated a clear plan for providing stable, consistent parenting going forward. Marshall held his breath. My ruling is as follows. Full legal and physical custody of Marcus Hoffman is granted to the petitioner, Marshall Hoffman. Mrs. Gregory is granted supervised visitation every other weekend, with the provision that Royal Trujillo shall have no contact with the child whatsoever. Should Mr. Trujillo's criminal case resolve in acquittal, which seems unlikely given current charges, this provision remains in effect unless and until Mrs. Gregory can demonstrate, through extensive counseling and changed behavior, that she prioritizes her son's safety over her relationships. Relief crashed over Marshall like a wave. He heard Stacy sob, heard Sterling arguing for reconsideration, heard Genevieve thanking the judge. But all of it was background noise. He'd won. Marcus was safe. The nightmare was over. Outside, reporters mobbed them. Marshall made a brief statement. I'm grateful to Judge Fields for her wisdom and to everyone who helped protect my son. Our focus now is on healing and moving forward. Inside the courthouse, Megan Donovan brought Marcus out. The boys saw Marshall and ran to him, and this time there were no restrictions, no supervision requirements. Marshall swept his son up in his arms and held him tight. We're going home, Marshall whispered. You're coming home with me. Forever. Forever. That afternoon, they moved Marcus's things out of Stacy's house. She stayed in her room, didn't come out to say goodbye. Marshall felt a flicker of pity. She'd lost her husband to prison, her son to custody, and her credibility to public judgment. But the pity didn't linger. She made her choices. 3 weeks later, Marshall and Marcus settled into a 2-bedroom apartment in Henderson, close to Marcus's school. Blake helped them furnish it, turning it from blank walls to something resembling home. Marshall found work as a training consultant for a private security firm. Local work, 9 to 5, weekends off. No more deployments. No more choosing between career and family. The custody case made national news. Royal Trujillo's corruption trial became a media spectacle, exposing deep rot in Henderson PD. 6 other officers were eventually charged. Vincent Cordova pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and received life without parole. Royal went to trial, was convicted on all counts, and received 45 years. Sterling Blanchard was disbarred after evidence emerged that he'd helped bury previous complaints against Royal. Stacy moved back east, taking a teaching position in Delaware. She sent birthday cards to Marcus, but never requested modification of the visitation order. Roscoe Mercer got his story told. A local journalist wrote an expose clearing his name. His daughter reached out, and they began rebuilding their relationship. Bennett Warren went into private investigation work, helping Luther Murphy's firm. Donna Goodwin, the neighbor who'd recorded the video that started everything, became a regular presence in Marcus's life, a surrogate grandmother who brought cookies and wisdom in equal measure. Blake remained Marshall's closest friend, the bond of shared combat and shared purpose unbreakable. And Marcus thrived. The nightmares faded. His grades improved. He joined a soccer team that Marshall coached, made friends, laughed without the shadow of fear. Therapy helped him process the trauma, separate truth from the lies he'd been told. He was still healing, would be for years, but he was safe. That was what mattered. 6 months after the custody hearing, on a Saturday morning, Marshall and Marcus sat at their small kitchen table eating pancakes. The TV was on in the background. News about Royal's sentencing hearing, where victims had testified to the harm he'd caused. "Dad," Marcus said, "do you think Royal's sorry for what he did?" Marshall considered the question carefully. "I think Royal's sorry he got caught. But sorry for hurting people? No. People like Royal don't think about the harm they cause. They only think about themselves. I feel bad for Mom. She's all alone. You can feel bad for her and still know she made wrong choices. Both things can be true." Marcus nodded, processing this. "I'm glad I'm here with you." "Me too, buddy. Me too." They finished breakfast and headed out to soccer practice. As Marshall drove, watching his son chatter about game strategy, he reflected on everything that had happened. The nightmare of that video, the rage and helplessness, the decision to fight, not with just lawyers and courts, but with every resource at his disposal. He'd taken on a corrupt cop, a broken system, and the blue wall of silence. He'd used military contacts, illegal intelligence, and relentless determination. He'd bent rules, exploited connections, and orchestrated Royal Trujillo's downfall with the precision of a military operation. Some would say he crossed lines, that the ends didn't justify the means, that he'd been obsessive, dangerous, too willing to destroy. But Marcus was safe. That was the only metric that mattered. Royal Trujillo had thought himself untouchable, protected by his badge and connections. He'd underestimated the lengths a father would go to protect his child, had underestimated Marshall's training, his network, his willingness to burn everything down if it meant Marcus could be free. It was a lesson Royal would have decades to contemplate in federal prison. Marshall pulled into the soccer field parking lot, helped Marcus out of the car. The boy ran to join his teammates, his laughter carrying on the Nevada wind. No fear in his eyes, no bruises on his arms. Just a kid playing soccer on a sunny Saturday morning. Marshall watched him play, feeling something settle in his chest. Peace, maybe, or just the absence of war. He'd been a soldier for 12 years, had fought in distant wars for unclear reasons. But this fight to save his son, had been the one that mattered most. And he'd won, not through the system, not through hoping justice would prevail, but through making his own justice, through being the weapon his son needed when everything else failed. Royal Trujillo was in prison. Stacy had lost custody. Marcus was safe. Mission accomplished.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen